we're going to go ahead and look at our 5.6 lesson. To do this lesson, we're going to be translating from an English sentence into an algebraic equation, just like we did in a previous chapter. So, a couple key things we're going to want to remember. The word is means we're going to write down the equal sign. The word of means we're going to write down a multiplication sign, and we'll be using a dot. If I see a percent sign, because of what we talked about in 5.5, I'll put that number over 100. And then this one is new. If I see the words what number, I'm going to write down a variable. I'm going to use the variable x, which is why we want to use the dot for time so we don't get confused between the two. So we'll go ahead and take a look at example 1. I'm going to go piece by piece through this English sentence and change it into a math equation. So 25%, I'll put down 25 over 100, of means times, 40 is what number? If I solve this, I'll know what 25% of 40 is. Students are allowed to use a calculator in Chapter 5. So we will start by changing this fraction into a decimal. Some students aren't even really sure how to do this on a calculator. To change the fraction into a decimal, I'm just going to type 25 divided by 100. When I hit enter, it will give a decimal for me, 0.25 times 40 equals x. Then I can hit times 40 in my calculator to solve and figure out that 10 equals x. I want to take this answer 10 that I got and put it back up in this sentence to think about it and make sure my answer is reasonable and that it makes sense. The best way for kids to understand percent is to think about the test scores and the grades that they get. So if they got a 25% on a test that was out of 40 questions, would it make sense that they had gotten 10 of them right? Well, most students would say if there were 40 questions on the test and I only got 10 of them right, then yeah, I would expect to have a pretty bad grade, like a 25%. So it's a good way for students to go through and make sure that their answer is even reasonable. We'll come down and look at example 2. 60% of 150 is what number? We'll solve it in the same way. 60 divided by 100 is 0.60. Then we're multiplying by 150. If we do that on our calculator, 0.6 times 150, we'll get 90 for x. And then we're going to come and cross out where it says what number and see if 90 makes sense. If I had a 60% on a test that was out of 150 questions, would it make sense that I had gotten 90 of them correct? It's reasonable and a good way for kids to make sure they haven't made a silly math mistake so far in their work. In example 3 and example 4, we see that the what number part of the sentence is not always going to come at the end, and this adds on one extra step for us in our algebra. So I'm going to start by translating in exactly the same way. 75% of what number is 48. I'm going to continue in the exact same way by changing that fraction into a decimal. So if students don't know how to do that, 75 divided by 100 on their calculator is 0.75 times x equals 48. And this is where students really need to focus on their algebra work. The goal is to get this x to be all by itself on one side of the equal sign. That means I need to get rid of a times 0.75. To get rid of multiplication, we're going to use division. So I'll divide by 0.75. Our rule is that whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So I'll divide this side by 0.75. My times 0.75 and divide by 0.75 cancel out. Now I've accomplished my goal. X is by itself on one side of the equal sign, so I need to solve this. Clear out my calculator. 48 divided by 0.75 is 64. Now I want to take my answer and put it back up here in place of the words what number to see if this makes sense. If I had gotten a 75% on a test that was out of 64 questions, would it make sense that I had gotten 48% of them right? A 48 out of 64 would probably be around a 75%. Let's look at example 4. 120% of what number is 72? So if I got a 120% on a test and I got 72 of them right, I must have gotten more right than there actually are on the test. So my what number should be smaller than 72. And that's what we kind of want students to start thinking about so that they can predict what their answer should be and decide if their answer that they get is reasonable or not. So 120% of what number is 72? I'm going to change this into a decimal and get 1.2 times x equals 72. I'll divide both sides by 1.2 so that x is by itself. And then on my calculator, I'll do 72 divided by 1.2 to get 60. I'll take that answer and put it back up here to see if it's reasonable or not. Would it make sense that I would get a 120% on a test if out of 60 questions I got 72 right? Yes, that does make sense. Some other examples of checking to see if things would be reasonable would be something like down here on number 5. If they want 5% of the number 10, that's going to be a really small number because 5% is not very much. Compared to 62%, students can start thinking, well, that's just a little bigger than 50%, so my answer should be just a little bit bigger than half of this number. If you're a student watching this video for extra credit, the secret code word is algebra. Thank you guys for watching, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me.